David Curtin, who's the Associate Director at the for Academic Success at the Western Sydney University, the college. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Pushpa. Can I just check that I'm sharing? Can you see my? Yep. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. My name's, as Pushpa said, David. I'm the Associate Director of Academic Success at Western Sydney University, the college. And this is a summary of the presentation I gave at the conference in June. So Western Sydney University, by its very name, as John alluded to earlier, in Sydney, most of the sandstone institutions, the top tier institutions, are along the eastern seaboard of Australia. Western Sydney University, by its very name, has campuses spread across Western Sydney, funnily enough, hence the name. So we are all over Western Sydney, from the far north out to the Blue Mountains in the west, and then down to the south coast as well. Very much like Liz's cohort at Southern Cross, we tend to have lower socioeconomic status students, very often first in family, very often not born in Australia or have at least one parent not born in Australia, very often don't speak English at home, and very often, and perhaps most importantly, have had an unsatisfactory high school experience. Very often didn't complete year 12, very often don't have what we call an ATAR, which is the score you need to get into university. Very often our students have no access to tertiary education, and we're one of the few institutions that are truly open access, in that we accept anyone. The only requirement is that you are not currently enrolled in high school and you pay the fees, and you are accepted. So the college, we teach first year university as a diploma, but our mission is to widen access to tertiary education as far as it can be widened. Our being open access guides everything that we do, is about open access. So we converted to block mode at the college. We've just completed our first full year of block mode. Before that, we had a traditional approach with 3 terms of 12 weeks each. We had a whole grab bag of standard diplomas, extended diplomas were 4 terms, and our integrated diplomas, we had something for everyone, and it was impossible to timetable, impossible to manage. Students were regularly off pattern, and it was extremely problematic. But most of all, although many students excelled, our pass rates were not fantastic, typically around 53%. Many students never completed their diploma, and we had a retention rate of 56%. So unacceptably low on all of our success measures, and declining. So we conducted a pilot program with Block, using the Victoria University model. So our model is very similar to Victoria University. We now have reduced ourselves to 10 diplomas, a 12-month diploma. Each diploma has 8 block subjects of 4 weeks each, and 2 online preparatory subjects, which take a semester. The main thing I want to talk about, so here's what it looks like. So we have 10 diplomas, equivalent to a first year university experience. The main thing I want to talk about today is the common subject, Introduction to University Life, which every student will study in their first block. And this subject was specifically developed to enable the transition into tertiary education for students who have had an unsatisfactory experience with education so far in their lives. So they might have not finished high school, or they might be a mature age student who's coming back to education. So all of our students will study Introduction to University Life. And it's all about what success means, what the definition of success is for each student as an individual. So we look at, we use the Big Five personality traits as a way in. So students will do the Big Five personality traits test, and then we go to the literature to look at the link between individual personality and success, whatever success means to you. And it means different things to different people. So students are encouraged to define what success means for them, and then to think about their personality, think about their previous experience with education, and draw the link between those two. So that takes 4 weeks to do that, and then we start to look at study plans. We look at mindset and so on. And the idea is to set students up for their remaining 7 blocks. This approach has been very, very successful, and it's been so successful that we're kind of left wondering why we haven't been doing this for years. So our pass rate in this subject, remember that we had a pass rate of around 50%. Through 2023 and 2024 was our pilot cohort of a handful of students. 2025 autumn, which in the Southern Hemisphere is March to June, was our first intake of over 1,600 students across all diplomas. And then our spring intake is typically around a third of our autumn intake. So our pass rates were far exceeded our expectations. So we're hovering around typically around 85% pass rate for this subject. For students who would have had around a 50% pass rate in our previous diplomas. So the change for us is significant. And our retention. So retention in this context is the number of students who were retained from block 1 into block 2. And again, in the past, this is a comparison to students who remained with us from term 1 into term 2. Typically, that was around 55%. We're now hovering around the 95% retention of students from block 1 into block 2. And typically, that's the number that actually stay with us until the end of their diploma. So our retention rates and pass rates, very much the same story that Liz told us about and that everyone has seen. Our results from converting to block away from turn have far exceeded our expectations. And a lot of that we put down to that first common subject, Introduction to University Life, because it enables that transition from being unsuccessful in education, especially and never considering tertiary education as a possibility, through to actually, I can do this. I can be successful in a tertiary education environment. And we put a lot of that down to that first subject, which encourages students to determine what success is for them and then to go out and find it. Here's what students think so I'll just let you read these. This is some student feedback on this subject. It turns out our students love having a good argument with each other. So as many people find, we no longer have lectures. We don't have exams. Our classrooms are very, very active. Students are getting up and walking around, writing on the white. Our walls are all covered in whiteboards. Students are writing on the walls. In fact, our desks are now made out of whiteboard material, so they can use whiteboard markers to write on the desks. And they love an argument with each other. So spontaneous classroom debates are quite a feature of our classrooms, and students love it. We consistently get good feedback on that. Of course, there's always things we can do better. There was another point there. The things that students say we can do better are these. Another one, yeah. The one in the top right-hand corner is interesting. This subject is every teacher is expected to teach this subject. So if you're a chemistry teacher, you've got to learn the big 5 personality traits and learn about success and learn about study skills to be able to teach that. Similarly, if you come from social science, if you come from engineering, if you come from arts or teaching, all teachers will teach this subject. And so part of the skill of teaching this subject is to contextualize it to your cohort. So if you're a chemistry teacher, you're constantly talking about what it takes to be successful to be a chemist. If you're an education teacher, you're talking about what students need to be successful to be a teacher. So some of our teachers struggle with the contextualization of the subject, and that's what the comment in the top right-hand corner is about. So that was it. In a snapshot, that was what I talked about at the conference, where as John has mentioned and other speakers have mentioned, going to block it is a whole of institution transformation, and it certainly was for us. There are some things that we think were significant as significantly contributing to our success. And there are quite a few of those. We believe this subject, this introduction to university life, which enabled the transition for open access students into tertiary education, students who were unhappy with their high school experience and who didn't have a university entrance score. We believe this subject is actually a key part of what enabled our success. So that's it. I'm happy to field any questions.
Thank you, David. There's a question from Liz. What are the main drivers of increases in pass rates and retention for your students?
Liz, I think our classes are as other presenters have spoken, they're really active. So it's a flipped model. All of our material, all of our assessment tasks are online. The students are free to access them as soon as the subject opens. All of the assessments, all the material is online. So we don't teach the material. We apply the material, and students are expected to have done all the pre-lesson material. Very often they haven't, but teachers will go into class and start applying it immediately. And that approach raises the expectation that you actually have done the pre-lesson material. So we certainly, I think it may be a comment that John made to me when the first time we ever met John. You're not the sage on the stage, you're the guide on the side, and our teachers very much guide students to apply the material rather than stand at the front and teach it. Some of our teachers, and I think other people have spoken about this today, some of our teachers struggle with that because they're so used to lecturing. They think that's what the job is, lecturing, but they tend to get filtered out. They either go off to re-education camp or they get filtered out. So I think the active nature of our classroom, the very social nature of our classrooms is part of the success. Does that answer the question, Liz?
Yes, thank you. Thanks, David.
And we have a question from Julie. Hi, Julie.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. Mine was around, sorry if I missed it. The coffee's just kicking in now, David. Around assessments, is it different for different diplomas? Do the assessments change depending on what study area the students are going into?
No, the assessments are identical for every cohort. So the classes are split by cohort. So all right. the scientists will all be in a class together. The IT people will all be in a class together. But the assessments tend to talk about what does success mean for you in your chosen career. So the teacher will then focus students on, well, you're a chemist or you're a teacher. What does that mean for teachers? So, but the prompt is identical for everyone. Teachers and students contextualize it for their field of interest.
Yeah, it's something that I think VU would greatly benefit from. I teach into the health sciences, and it's a great way to introduce students to the profession and, as you say, to take ownership of their learning. And it's a great reflecting point later on back in the year to show them any information that they had early on about what they were aspiring to, what they imagined it was going to be like, as opposed to what's become of it. It's a great initiative. Thank you for sharing it.
Thanks, Julie.
Tom, question?
So just to point on your previous, what you were saying about the, individuals. So we have our first unit called Skills for Scientists. We have science students, and we basically teach them, what it takes to be a scientist from things like that. We actually get them to say what the different things a scientist needs to do on the first day, and then basically that's what we build the whole block around. So they kind of discover it themselves, which is very good.
Yeah, it's very much it's basically the same idea, except that we've done it for the entire college. So it's the same. Whilst there is nothing in the subject that talks about skills for scientists, so the students have to realise, well, I'm here to study science, so I need to go away and identify those skills. And there are some prompts to sort of direct them towards where they would find that information for their own discipline. But the idea is that everyone would have the same first block experience as an introduction to university. Yeah.
And then the question I actually had was an administrative one. So with all the increased retention and everything else, have you had problems finding enough classrooms and?
It's we have an average class. We aim to have an average class of 25. So we typically start in the past. We started the term with somewhere between 30 and 33, knowing by the end of the term or by the census date we'd be down to 25. That now doesn't happen. So we have a room capacity problem where we have to find more rooms. And so because we're the college which is wholly owned by the university, the university owns all the rooms. So there's now tension to say, well, our retention is so good, we've actually got to have more rooms, and we've got to have more teachers, and so on and so on. So it's a great problem to have, but it's something we've exceeded our own expectations.
Good to hear.
One last question from Ona.
Thank you. David, it might be early days because of that. It might be a comment instead of a question, but how are the students doing in the second year or the following years after their transition from diploma to bachelor degrees? So do you have any tracer study in place, or are you planning to do that? It would be a quite interesting thing to see. Thank you.
Honor, that's it's a really incisive question. So from our pilot, which was social science students, our initial pilot was done in the Diploma of Social Sciences. Those students are now in their third year at university. It's a bit hard to get the data, but as far as we can tell, they're doing very, very well. Our first cohort of around 1,200 students will commence their second year at the university in autumn, which is March next year, and we're frantically putting in place the mechanisms to follow them through to the end to see what happens. Because whilst they're at the college, we can measure their success. We actually do think our real measure of success won't come for another 2 years till we see what happens at the end. That's what we're really looking forward to. But it'll be 2 years before we know.
Thank you, David. That was great. Thank you so much.